Hi everyone, welcome back to How to Art. This is video 15. It's also the finale video for this piece. After much time, it is finally going to be finished, and I can upload it everywhere. The only part left to really color is the inside of the cloak, that dark red part. So I should be getting started on that right about now. Again, going through and figuring out how to work around my windows. Alright, getting the flat, control click on the image so it's selected, and make sure everything stays organized with my colors. Making the mask. There we go. Alright. And it's time to start shading in. This is one of the easiest ones to shade because it's just big and long, and I'm probably going to speed through parts of it, but I just want to mention that it's long, it's straight, and a lot of the parts of the cloak are recessed into the back. It's just pushed into the back. So I can just get darker and darker shadows closer to the middle of her body where the cloak is, because it's draping around her. So you'll soon see me put in darker and darker shadows. The key thing here, where the light is hitting, I want that to be smooth. So rather than use the smudge tool, which could make it just cloudy, I try to blend it as much as I can with just the paintbrush. So that may take some playing around with grabbing the color by holding down Alt while you have the paintbrush and just eyedropping it then and there to try to find that blending gradient with the paintbrush itself, and it's sort of working, yeah. Now, smoother areas are notoriously harder to work with, but it's very rewarding if you can get it right, which is why I'm spending so much time on this one curve, and just, eyedropping and blending and keeping my brush on a fairly low level. Here I think it's on pen opacity is on, and the opacity is what, 63-ish%. You can play around with that, and now we have the shadows. It's amazing how the change in color can really just push back the distance for an object and give you the illusion of 3 dimensions. Tone is very important. So I've said this before, I'll say it again, don't be afraid to go dark in your coloring, because the advantage of digital coloring is that you can go dark and then you can go light on a layer right on top of that. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. I spend a lot of time working on the inside of the cloak, mostly because it's big, smooth areas, so I'm going to start speeding through. And I largely speed through because you can pretty much see what I'm doing. Alright, I'm barely using the smudge tool. I'm using my paintbrush at a low opacity and just going through, and now I have the smudge tool. But I only use the smudge tool once I've gotten the kind of gradient that I already want, and the smudge tool is just sort of there to add a sort of finishing smoothness to it all. Yeah. In just a moment or so, I'm going to finish up the red part here after putting in my highlight, and we're going to be going into the final pass sort of things. It's like a 2-tier process that I use. So in just a moment, this will be finished. And now, what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to put in some gradients that are going to be with different layer styles, because this is sort of the final effect I want for the overall image, because the figure is completely shaded, completely done, but it's still like, it's still raw, it's rendered, but the image as a whole is not finished. So I get rid of the arrows because I don't need that guideline anymore, and this layer that I'm currently on is above every other layer. So if you think of it in terms of a painting, what I'm going to do now is apply a sort of glaze. So I set this layer on multiply, and now I'm going to be working with gradients, which are great. I love gradients. And I'm picking from the background and I'm fiddling with the tone and the hue saturation because this is going to help integrate the figure into the background as a whole. And a linear gradient is not what I wanted. I wanted the radial one, the circular one, the second button right there. And I may not have done this during the underpainting, but it's an idea similar to underpainting, that I'm going in to where all the big shadows are, but I only want it to go on the figure. So I shift select all the layers that include my figure, Control G to make it a group, name the group so I know that it is the figure, and that gradient layer is going to be Control Alt G for being clipped to the figure, which I should be doing soon. Now, there we go. So now it's clipped only to the figure, it won't spill out into the background. Now it looks messy, it looks really bad now, but that's when I play with the opacity. The opacity doesn't have to be that big. A great way to test your changes is to click the layer on and off, the visibility. And now we're going to do another clipped layer with an overlay. You can do Control Shift N for a new layer to make it easier to get that little dialog box. So I'm picking from the background again, and this time I'm using overlay, which is one of the, it's a cool layer style, you know, you have to play around with it quite a bit before it does what you want it to do. So in this case, I want the highlight off the top, and you know, just you have to play around with it, find the colors that you like, and more likely than not, the opacity is going to go down because I don't want this sort of drastic lighting happening. I just want to brighten it up a little bit because all the details are there. Overlay and multiply layers help me preserve the detail while enhancing the image, you know, subtly, because the whole point of making such an ornate background was so I could integrate the figure into the image as a whole. It's very important that when you make an illustration, if you want it to be a finished image, you have to consider the setting in which your figure is placed. You know, there's bounced light everywhere, and this is a sort of abstract background, not an environment per se, but the concept still applies. And again, I just lowered the opacity of the overlay way down. Sometimes I use screen, sometimes I use overlay, but in any case, now I highlighted and I duplicated the entire layer into just the figure with all the edits that I've made, and I go and I play with all the different layer styles to find one that I like. So you see I'm going through and I sped this up so you can see me and my decision process, and I landed on screen, and I really liked the way it looked. So what I'm going to do with this layer is I'm going to blur it with a Gaussian blur, and you see that nice shiny halo all around there? You play around with the radius, see how much you want it to shine, and then I lower the opacity on that to give this sort of nice ephemeral glow to the entire figure. And that's something that I think I read in a tutorial somewhere, just like one little tip that I picked up, and I love the idea of it. It's just great. Finally, I have one more overlay for a light. I think I chose yellow and I put it on screen. Screen is a nice layer style. Very bright, so you have to be careful if you're using light colors with screen. And in this case, I just wanted it to be clear where the light was coming from, and I wanted to have this sort of, in 3D we call it light fog. I don't know if there's a 2D equivalent, but essentially it's when you can see the rays of light mixing in with the particles of the air and whatnot. So again, this one went down in opacity. The very last passes of this image are of subtle things, just some layers and glazes on top of the figure to make sure everything just sort of comes together. Sometimes I like what I do, sometimes I don't, and that's why we finagle with it. You know, you fiddle with it until it looks exactly the way you want it to look, and sometimes you gotta do a Control Alt Z a few times on Photoshop to have it look like the image that you have in your head. You know, it doesn't do to settle for something. Now in this case, I made a copy of the final figure, and I color-coded them so I know what I'm doing. Now, the very final figure is a copy of every edit I've made on the figure thus far, and I do a final Gaussian blur on that, and I scoot down the opacity. This is just to give a softness to the image. It's a non-destructive way of basically adding a blur filter to the figure. Non-destructive methods are very important. It's something I learned while in my college classes, and it really helps to know, to be able to go back to layers that you've made before. So now it looks like we are just about done. And since we're just about done, here is the very last final step that I recommend for every artist ever. Sign your work. 'Cause, hey, you put all this time and effort into it, you might as well sign it. Now, depending on how dark the background is, I normally sign my name in white or black in some nondescript corner of the image. You notice that I'm not writing in English letters. No, I'm writing in Gujarati. That's my mother tongue. I figured that'd be more unique than, signing my name in English or using my internet handle. I also date the image for when I completed it. Sure, the file has the metadata for the date on it, but sometimes that gets all wonky, so I want to be able to save it. And don't forget to save your image. Save and save often. Now the image is complete. This whole series of videos for this piece is complete. If you'd like to see the final image, please check out the link to my Deviantart. Please rate, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. You can also find me on Tumblr and Patreon. I would greatly appreciate any support given, and I'm so happy that you chose to watch this video to the end, and I hope you'll watch future videos that I make of more artwork with more tips and tricks in Photoshop.